In my 20s, I put myself in a shitload of debt, and it led to the biggest breakdown in my life. But let's rewind to the beginning. In 2014, me and my wife bought a home close to the very top of our borrowing power. We had the dream of renovating this rundown 1960s home into our very own version of a block-worthy dream house. Our strategy was simple. As we continued in our careers, our income was expected to increase. So once our home went up in value, we would refinance our mortgage, releasing the money required in order to complete the renovation. But after a year of living in the house, we had a grim moment of realization. House prices across Perth had declined. And in our area in particular, house prices went down by over 5%. Since we bought the house with only a 5% deposit, we now owned a home that was the same value as the mortgage. But the 2 hours spent after work every day watching a combination of House Hunters, Fixer Upper, and The Block fueled our desire to transform our home. We must have been talking about it non-stop because one day our in-laws made us an offer that we couldn't refuse. They were willing to increase the mortgage on their own home in order to fund our renovation as long as we could make the repayments. With interest rates at around 5.5%, we agreed. But since we were also paying our own mortgage, we elected for this new renovation mortgage to be interest only, which reduces the amount that needs to be paid back to the bank each month. But it also meant we weren't paying down that mortgage at all. We were only paying the interest. So then we had two mortgages on the one house in the hopes that once the renovations were complete, we could refinance our own mortgage based on the value of the renovated home and pay back my in-laws the renovation mortgage. We pushed ourselves to the absolute brink of what we could afford. Then, just like in any renovation show you've ever seen, the renovation went over budget. After sinking every dollar we had into the reno and the rising cost of the reno pushing our repayments beyond what we could afford, my mental health started to deteriorate. We were faced with a decision. Do we cut our losses, scrap the rest of the reno, and look at selling what we had, walking away with a debt while being forced back into the rental market? Or do we brainstorm a way to generate additional income? At the time, I was a full-time teacher, and my wife was working in public relations full-time. The thought of losing our home was debilitating. And the more debilitating it felt, the harder it was for us to brainstorm a way to generate that additional income. One afternoon, I was particularly down after realizing that the debt we would be left with if we sold our home was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then I received an email. It was from a parent of one of my previous students, wondering if I did any private tuition. In that moment, a viable side hustle had crystallized. It meant a shitload more work for me, but private tuition in addition to full-time work might just be enough to get us over the line. One student turned into two, and then three, and then all of a sudden I was at 10 students that I was tutoring privately each week. I was now working 50 hours a week, but that debilitating feeling had dissipated. I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. As our renovations came to an end, we successfully refinanced and paid back my in-laws. But I hadn't anticipated the dramatic increase in repayments now that we were forced to pay principal and interest on our home loan. This made me rethink my tutoring business. How could I generate even more income? By restructuring how I delivered the tuition, our business quadrupled in size, growing to 40 students. Life was good. For the first time in years, our income was paying our expenses and actually leaving us with some savings. Then one day after work, my wife told me she was pregnant. After a few days of just pure joy, a familiar feeling reared its ugly head again. I felt suffocated by the thought that our income was going to be almost halved when she finished her maternity leave. Did we want to use daycare? How much even is daycare? I'm already working like 55 hours a week. How can I possibly work anymore? If you're in your 20s, these are the questions you need to be asking yourself before you make any massive financial decisions. How will you afford this life if you have kids? What will your life look like? And what will this mean in terms of your happiness? I had 9 months to figure it out. So while I was still working full-time as a teacher, I took our business to the next level. I leased an office space and employed my first staff member. Over the next year, our team grew to 6 teachers, tutoring over 90 students. Financially, the business was supplementing my wife's full-time income and then some. But the hardest pill to swallow was that I was working 60 plus hours a week. But it meant that our son had his mum 100% of the time. which in my personal opinion was worth every second. As the business grew to 15 teachers and over 180 students, it was finally time to reduce my workload. So at the start of 2020, I reduced my overall workload by about 30 hours a week, mainly by reducing my role as a teacher down to only 1 day a week. Then 3 weeks later, we found out baby number 2 was on the way. But this time I felt adequately prepared. Everything was in place to handle another little rugrat. Then COVID happened. Our income was reduced to only 10% of what it was because COVID forced us to shut our doors basically immediately. That prompted my first real breakdown. All of those years spent working 60 plus hours to sustain the life based on the financial decisions that we had made in our 20s felt like a complete waste of time now that something completely outside of my power had stripped it away from me. How long was life going to be like this? How long could we survive? COVID rewired me. It made me want to add as many safety nets around our income as possible. Our tutoring business survived, but I was now focused on generating alternative income streams. I completed my mortgage broking qualification, and just after the birth of our second son, Trusted Finance was born. But as our family grew, so did the number of hours I spent working. My time is still distributed between teaching, the tutoring business, and content creation for Trusted Finance. At over 75 hours a week working, I take solace in the fact that I genuinely do love what I do. This schedule then leaves me with the remaining 44 hours a week that I'm awake. With most of those hours spent playing dad, much fewer left playing husband, and even less left for myself, I felt compelled to share this journey with you. Every single time my wife and I were faced with a challenging situation in terms of finances or family, we rose to the occasion. So if you're in your 20s trying to buy your first home, please think about what it might look like if you have kids. Be explicit with your partner. Make sure you know who might want to stay at home and be the primary caregiver. For how long would they want to do that job? And what would that do to your joint income? What if interest rates go up? Can you still afford it? Adversity gave birth to the growth that I've had in terms of family and wealth. But I've had to and continue to sacrifice a lot of time in order to sustain it. So, what are you willing to sacrifice?